Hello, and welcome to another LXD post-release review of the new features. I realized that this one is a bit late compared to what we've done in the past. Usually I try to do a quick live stream going through the new features of LXD release about like a day after the release. LXD 4.10 has now been around for a couple of weeks at least. But yeah, after the holiday break, we've all been quite busy. It was hard to find the time to get one of those done. So let's go through the new features. LXD 4.9 is not one of 4.10, sorry, is not a very busy release on our side. We only had a handful of new features. Most of them are actually kind of network related. It's just kind of how it worked out. 4.11, I believe, will have quite a few new, slightly more major features included. It's mostly because the 4.10 development cycle happened to be going over the holiday break, and most of us were gone for about 2 weeks during that time, so a bit less stuff in there. So the first feature that was added is around network state reporting. So LXD API has a bunch of information on networks and network devices. So we can see here both a mix of LXD managed things like LXD BR0 and other devices that are just physical devices on the system. So we could query ETH0, which is physical Ethernet port. It just shows that it is physical, doesn't have any, it's not managed by LXD. And then there's an API to query its state. So if I just bring that up to the top, we can see basic things like packet counters, byte counters, hardware info, MTU, etc. So that's what we normally have for most of the devices, and we've been adding more and more information about different device types. So if I take a bridge, in past releases, we've added support in there now for showing bridge port information, so the forwarding delay, the ID of the switch whether STP is enabled or not, and VLAN filtering details. So that was added a while back. What got added this time around is information about VLAN devices. So if I create one of those, so I'm just gonna create a new device called ETH0100. This is gonna be on top of ETH0. It's a VLAN type device, and the VLAN ID is 100. So if I create one of those, it will now show up in the networks list, and its state information. The new thing that was added in 4.10 is this. So if we detect that a device is a VLAN, we now show what the lower device, so what its parent is, in this case ETH0, and what the VLAN ID is. That's because like it is a bit of a convention to usually call those devices the parent dot VLAN ID, but it's not a requirement. So someone could totally do something like this. And now you've got a device that's called foo, which doesn't immediately give away its VLAN ID, but it's still a VLAN device. So LXD detects that and tells you that its lower device is still ETH0 and that the VLAN ID is 100. Okay, let's delete foo. All right. The second feature that got added is proxy support for VMs. So the LXD proxy devices are usually extremely flexible. They let you proxy between protocols, optimize or not, inject HA proxy headers, and a whole bunch of other things. For VMs, we don't have pretty much any of that because all the nice features actually require LXD managing a small process that can attach both on the host side and inside the instance to forward traffic between protocols and listen on both sides. That's not really practical to do for VMs, but what we've added support for at least is NAT mode. So the way that works is you need an instance. So in this case, I've got one called V1, which is a virtual machine. You need to fix its IP address. So in this case, I'm gonna override its ETH0 device, and IPv4 address is now gonna be a fixed static address like that. And what you can then do is add a proxy device. So in this case, I'm gonna call it, the device will be called HTTP. It's a proxy device. It binds on the host, so that means it's the host IP that's forwarded into the instance of the other way around. it listens on the host at 10.166.11.1 on port 80. And we want that to connect into the instance, which is 10.166.11.200, also on port 80. And we're using the NAT mode because it's the only thing that's allowed. And then start that VM. So now the VM is gonna boot up. I guess we can watch that. And there's a smaller HTTP server installed in that VM that will start up and listen. So once that's booted, which it should be about now, yeah, it looks like it's pretty much good to go. I should be able to query it first on the actual instance IP address. So that's on 200. Yep, there we go. And now, thanks to the proxy device, if I do it on .1, that works just the same. So that can be quite useful. Usually you wouldn't actually forward that to the bridge IP. It's particularly useful to forward to a public IP that your host has. The thing that's worth keeping in mind is because this is NAT mode, it only works if your host is the gateway in and out of the instance. If you're using an external, like if you're bridging to physical network, or if you're doing MAC VLAN, you can't use this. But for anyone running just LXD bridge on a server that has a public IP, that will work just fine. The next feature I can't actually demo. I can show what the command would look like, which is this. So v1 f0 security port isolation. So this is now a new security flag we've added to NIC devices, which when bridged to a Linux bridge can turn on the port isolation. That prevents this instance from interacting with any of the other instances. The only port it's allowed to interact with is the bridge itself on its way out of the bridge. That's super useful if you're running untrusted workloads and you don't want them to have any way of talking to each other. This, in combination with the other security flags we have, is super useful. The catch is that this is dependent on a very new version of IP route and the bridge command, which we don't have in the current version of the tools shipped in the LXD snap. So if I was to actually do this, so it already exists because I had already overridden something on f0. But if I set it, I can't do it because instance is running, which is fine. If I stop the instance and I do it again, it succeeds, but the VM will fail on startup. There we go. It's failing because the bridge command in the snap does not have that particular option, which is isolated on. This will get fixed because we are working on switching LXD to the Core 20 base, which will get the entire LXD snap onto Ubuntu 20.04. And at that point, the command should work fine. But until then, this is pretty much limited to people building LXD themselves and running that on a very modern Linux distro. Okay, let's undo this. Okay, and just start the VM again. One of the last things we've done as far as networking in this LXD release is improvement on NIC flow queuing. So up until now, any LXD virtual machine would have a single receive and transmit, two queues, single transmit, single receive for the network cards. So if I go look at net enp 5.0 and look at queues, there's only a single receive, single transmit. That was the case for every single LXD VM in the past. In this case, this VM only has one CPU, so it's actually reasonable to do it that way. But say we give the VM 2 CPUs, now we'll see the actual difference. Just need to give it a few seconds for it to start up. Okay, and if we go look at that same thing, so CPU info should show 2 CPUs, yeah. And now if we look at the actual device and look at its queues, we see we now have 2 receive, 2 transmit queues. And the same, that will just scale with the number of vCPUs attached to the VM, and that should provide much improved network throughput, especially if you're dealing with like multiple applications trying to send network traffic, send or receive network traffic. And that's it for the network side of things. The last feature we've added is just a few tweaks to the command line interface. So say we find an image, just that's smaller. Okay. Say we take that Ubuntu focal image here, and we show it. Actually, I can just do this. All right. So we see that image has a bunch of properties. In the past, if you needed to actually get any of those properties or modify any of those properties, the only way you could do it was with show or with edit, which spawns a text editor. And you can pipe YAML straight into edit to modify it. So that works, but it's still not exactly the most easy things to script. That has changed now. We've got new commands. So get property lets you query a specific property. So we could query, I don't know, the US. So that will work just fine. You can also do set property. So we could do foo bar. Now if we show things, we'll see that foo is set to bar. Obviously we can now query foo, that works fine. And just like every other get set command we've got in LXD, there's an unset as well to completely clear it. Which doesn't completely work. Okay, that's interesting. So I'll send a fix for that one. I guess this doesn't use a normal config handling code. Normally in LXD, any key that gets set to an empty value gets completely cleared. In this case, the unset sets the empty value, but the database stored it as empty instead of flushing the key. So that will be a tiny fix we just need to do. Practically, like the rest of the behavior from LXD is identical in that case, but it's still polluting the results a tiny bit. Actually, it would be different since we do give an error if the property doesn't exist. So anyway, tiny thing worth fixing. And that's it for the new features in 4.10. As I said, it's not one of our busiest releases. I expect 4.11, which we'll be releasing in, I think, a couple of weeks. Should be quite a bit busier than this. I hope this was useful. By now, pretty much anyone using the LXD snap should already be on 4.10, so you might have noticed a bunch of those already. If you've got any question or any issue, please go and talk to us on the forum. And yeah, I'll see you around in the next stream. Bye.